You're watching Reality Check. You may have missed this in the headlines, but there's widespread shock after the Supreme Court has ordered the eviction of more than 1 million, that's 10 lakh tribal and other forest-dwelling households across 16 states in India. If implemented, this, some say, could amount to the largest forced eviction in recent history. The effective deadline for the states to complete the eviction is just 5 months, by the end of July, the date of the next hearing. Here's the context. Wildlife groups went to court against the Forest Rights Act. The act, which was brought under the UPA time, requires that forest rights are handed back to forest dwellers. They need to prove their claim on the land. For this, they have to prove at least 3 generations lived in the forest before December 2005. Some wildlife groups who believe the act depletes the forest challenged it in court. That challenge has ultimately led to today's eviction order. Now, a total of 28 lakh people or 28 lakh claims were made to prove that they were genuine forest dwellers. Of those, the claims of about 12 lakhs, that's about 40% of all claims, have been rejected. Here's the list of the states which will now have to carry out the evictions. We put up only the ones most affected: Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, Orissa, West Bengal. Activists say the centre did not press its case strongly enough, one of the reasons for the Supreme Court order. Mariam Alavi tried to get a response from the government. This is what happened.
On February 13th, when the Supreme Court issued its orders of eviction, the lawyers of the central government were reportedly absent from court. We tried contacting the Minister for Environment, Forests and Climate Change, Dr. Harshvardhan, for a comment. But despite repeated phone calls and even visiting his residence here on 30 January mark, he was unavailable to meet us. The guards at the gate of his residence told us that Dr. Harshvardhan was not home, but he just drove past us in a car. We also tried contacting officials at the ministry. The secretary, the principal advisor, the Director General of Forests and the Additional Director General of Forests were all either out of town or unavailable to meet us.
Okay, joining us tonight on Reality Check, we have with us Madhu Sareen, who is somebody involved with the drafting process, the consultative process of the Forest Rights Act. We have with us Devi Goenka, Executive Trustee of the Conservation Action Trust. We'll come to Devi in a second. He's actually against the Forest Act. We have Lalita Kumaramangalam, Director, India Foundation, member of the BJP. Mohammad Khan, spokesperson of the Congress. Aruna Chandrasekhar, who's a journalist, a researcher, someone who's reported on this story. Now, Madhu, if I could just start with you, just to understand now the implications of this. The number seems huge, almost 11 to 12 lakh people, forest dwellers, households are going to be impacted. Now, the petitioners say that this order only impacts bogus claimants. They say that the act was never meant for land distribution to begin with, and they say that already about 72,000 square kilometers of forest land has already been converted to human ownership. So, in some ways, they're justifying this order.
Srinivas, I'd just like to point out a couple of things.
Yes.
Firstly, the nodal ministry is not the Ministry of Environment and Forest, but the Ministry of Tribal Affairs.
Okay.
So that is a bit of a pity that your people were trying to contact the wrong ministry. Secondly, this 3 generations thing is only for non-tribals. In the case of the tribals, they just have to prove their occupation since before December 2005.
Okay.
Now, going back to this particular court order, I was on the drafting committee, for the law.
Yes.
And I find it absolutely bizarre and very saddening that in 2002, actually the Environment Ministry had issued an eviction order.
Right.
And that had led to large-scale evictions.
Right.
Elephants were taken to break, the houses of Adivasis, their fields were set on fire, etc., etc. And it was in response to that the FRA, the Forest Rights Act, was enacted. Because what came out of that was that these people are not encroachers on these lands. These are the original inhabitants of these lands.
Right.
And the biggest encroacher is the government itself.
Right.
And if you look at, on the one hand, our constitution reserves the tribal majority areas under Schedule 5 of the constitution, providing them special protection.
Right.
And on the other hand, with two-line notifications, these lands were declared as state forests without recognizing the rights of the people who had been living there for ages.
Okay.
So, in fact, it was to undo that historical injustice, which the preamble of the Act mentions, which was accepted by the government, by the Ministry of Environment and Forests itself, that these were, their rights had not been recognized. Okay. And therefore, this Act was enacted to recognize the pre-existing rights of these people. So there are basically two categories of rights, which are, one is where land under actual occupation, which is what seems to be the assumption of the court, that that is the one that we are talking about.
Right.
But there are also community rights where, there are forests. The forest is there. It's just that the management authority and the rights of use are transferred to the communities. There is no
let me ask you this.
Destruction or removal or whatever of forest.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
You're saying that
I would just like to mention one other thing.
Can I just come back to you because can I just ask you something?
Let me just say one other thing.
Okay, quickly. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
My question to you is...
see, the thing is that the petition in the court was...
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead, ma'am.
See, the petition in the court was challenging the constitutional validity of the Act.
Right.
And it's absolutely bizarre, where the constitutional validity of the Act is being challenged. The court has ordered evictions under the Act. I mean, the Act has no provision for evictions. And, how it came to evicting people is actually quite bizarre. I mean, this case has been going on in the court for, 10 years or more.
Okay, let me...
And the different benches have heard, and there's a long history of it.
Okay. All right. So fair enough. You're pointing out multiple anomalies in the way that it is played out. One of the things I want to ask Lalita Kumaramangalam is this somewhat absentee approach taken by the centre, if that's what if the activists are to be believed. The centre did not fight for these tribals in the court. They were absent for several crucial hearings. Now, isn't that why would that be the case? Why abdicate responsibility?
Vasu, I'm sorry, I can't hear you properly, but I'll try to reply to what I heard from you.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think that the centre was absent on intention. I have no idea what actually lay behind them not being there. But you must understand that there are two differing arguments that have been presented through the years on this issue. Now, I'm not talking here again as a member of the BJP, but I'm basically an animal lover, and I also believe that human beings have rights. I think you will understand when I say that, and you will of course recognize the fact that there are too many people who say that our forests are being encroached upon, not merely by the tribals or by people from villages surrounding it, but even by the government, as the lady who spoke just before me said.
Yes.
Now, in its wisdom, the Supreme Court has taken this decision, and I don't know exactly what was in the petition that was presented by the animal rights activists, but I do believe that one of the pressing reasons they did give was the increasing encroachment of forest lands by people who used to live around the villages also.
Right.
Now, in the recent past, you would have heard about many of these stories that happened. Not just the thing of Avni in Maharashtra, which was really criminal, but that's my personal opinion, but also I think in forests around the country, whether it's Assam, whether it's Tamil Nadu, etc., too many reserved forest areas have been encroached upon by villagers. possibly because of a rise in population, possibly maybe because of migration from outside. I don't know. I really don't know if there are really any hard facts or statistics available on this issue. So I don't think it's fair to criticize the Supreme Court or the government just, without probably giving them a chance to respond. But I do know the Supreme Court must have been given pressing enough arguments to make such a decision. Now remember that the Supreme Court has said that it's only those whose legal rights over that land cannot be proved be moved out by the said governments that you picked, the 3 states or the 4 states that you picked. But they haven't said that people who have an original right over using the forest produce, the forest, etc., they be moved out.
Let me just bring in Aruna here. Aruna, to this point that the court is simply only talking about those who are not able to prove their rightful claim, you would say what?
The question of rightful claim and who are bogus claimants, for instance, anyone who has had a claim rejected. The Forest Rights Act, we're talking about 2006, to date in many Schedule 5, which is essentially protected Adivasi districts where Adivasi land is supposed to be sacrosanct. We see mines that are hectares and thousands of hectares wide that are encroaching upon forests. We're talking about districts where less than half of the population is formally literate, where people have not even heard of the act, are not aware of the fact that they have a right to consent over its diversion for large development projects. These are communities that have been subject to systemic oppression from colonial times onwards to even before, and looking at outsiders that have grabbed land. So I fail to see where this idea of bogus claimants comes from, because in most areas people have not even filed claims. And when they are rejected, there's also room for verification again. So I think and I think in India we haven't even been consistent with how much forest land we have lost. The numbers that we are submitting to the UN, especially on climate change, have been found to be not on cue. So where are these deforestation figures and numbers coming from, and how much of it is from?
So you're challenging the logic of the eviction order by saying that it's asymmetrical, there are other much bigger encroachers who get away. You're saying the claims process is also something which, for those who have marginal communities, they find it very hard to, actually go through this claims process. And you're also challenging the very idea that the scale of deforestation, such as it's made out, is perhaps exaggerated. So there's quite a lot to unpack there. But let me just come in to you, Mohammad Khan, because the fact is that, and I believe you're also associated at some level with the Forest Rights Act at the time it was being drafted. But now the Supreme Court order has come, and states have to abide by it. They have to carry out these evictions if they want to follow the court order. We've seen the list of states there. There are some Congress-ruled states there. Madhya Pradesh is top of the list. It's the biggest. Are you going to now start, are your state governments going to now start evicting these tribals?
Well, Vasuji, that's a difficult question, because frankly, as Madhuji very rightly pointed out, the prayer in the petition was not for the eviction of these people. The prayer was to strike down the law as unconstitutional, a premise that I completely disagree with, and we, the Congress, completely disagree with, because we drafted this law and we implemented it. But here there's a deeper narrative.
The order has come. Now what are you going to do?
We will enjoin upon this government, and we will insist that they submit a review application immediately, because as you rightly pointed out, and as it has been widely reported over the last 2 days, they didn't send a single legal officer or a representative to defend the law in court. So how can they, without a hearing, allow this law to be undermined? But there is a deeper narrative at play here, Vasuji.
So you're going to say, I'll come back to the deeper narrative, but you're saying that you're going to ask the government to challenge this order, this verdict in court.
Yeah, if you just give me 30 seconds, I just want to make a very, very quick point, because everybody made quite a few points. Now, to summarize what everybody said, the Forest Rights Act of 2006 is a remarkable piece of legislation. It explains in detail how individual rights and community rights have to be settled. What Aruna pointed out is also correct. These are people who are on the very margins of poverty. They are not familiar with the process. They often find the process intimidating, and therefore they do not go through with it. Let me give you an example. Vedanta, when it first came to us in the Ministry of Environment and Forest, we found that the state government of Odisha claimed forest rights have been settled. But when we sent a committee under NC Saxena Sahab, a very distinguished bureaucrat, we found that the process had not been followed.
Okay, let me just bring in
one line. Can I just say one very important line? Vasuji, tribal rights have never been a priority for this government, and I can give you 3 examples.
No, let's not get into the 3 examples.
So the absence of these legal officers is not a coincidence. It is by design.
Let me. I will come back to Lalita Kumaramangalam to challenge that, which I'm sure she will. But I'll come back to you the political debate in a second. Devi Goenka, Executive Trustee, Conservation Action Trust, is joining us on the phone line from Bombay. Unfortunately, we couldn't get an OB link to Devi, so he's on the phone. He's someone, I believe, who would have been on the side of the petitioners. Devi Goenka, respond to the fact that the argument being made is, number one, this act was never meant to, actually the challenge rather was never meant to result in evictions. It was a challenge to the act itself. And number two, there are enough safeguards built in to actually prevent people from being evicted.
Well, let me tell you one thing. First of all, 2 or 3 things need to be corrected. This court order is covering people who have filed claims and whose claims have been rejected following the due process of law, starting with a committee at the Gram Panchayat level, a subdivisional office committee, and a district level committee.
Okay.
If all the 3 committees have found that these claims are invalid, then only these claims have been treated as rejected. And the Supreme Court has only ordered that all the claims that have been rejected following the due process of law have to be evicted. It does not apply to people who have not filed claims.
What do you
It does not apply to people who
Devi
have not followed the process and so on.
Okay, Devi, can I just...
Fact number 1.
Devi Goenka, before you go to point 2, Devi Goenka, before you go to point 2, can I just jump in quickly to ask you the point that some of the other panelists made, that when you say the claims process was rejected under the due process of law, the argument here is really that how many of these marginal communities can even file or go through a claims process?
No, Srinivas, the point is that these people have filed claims and their claims were considered by the Gram Panchayat committee, of which the forest officers were not a part of. If the claim was rejected at the village level, it went to a second committee.
Right.
And if that second committee rejected the claim, it went to a third committee. And it's only after all the 3 committees rejected the claim that the state government says that these were bogus claims.
Right.
And it is only those bogus claims where the Supreme Court has ordered eviction. Second point I want to make is the act that was meant to correct the historical justice against tribals was expanded to cover other backward classes or other forest dwellers categories. And in fact, if you look at the ratio of the kind of claims being made between the tribals and the other categories, the ratio is 2:8 or 1:5.
Okay, I think
and
Madhu...
The third point is that the cutoff date that
Madhu
was envisaged in the Act was 1980, which is when the Forest Conservation Act came.
Yeah.
And it was then, because of political pressure and catering to the vote bank, the cutoff date was extended to 2005. And even today, there are encroachments happening on forest land. And the forest officers, because they are threatened with false cases being filed against them under the Atrocities to Scheduled Caste Act, are unwilling to touch any of the encroachments. That is the ground reality today.
Okay, can I just get Madhu Sareen wants to... Madhu Sareen, okay, just a second. Madhu Sareen wants to come in. Madhu Sareen, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, there is a clear procedure laid out in the Act. The initiating authority is the Gram Sabha and these 2 committees that Devi has just mentioned. The problem is that, in fact, the problem has been with the manner of implementation. There's been very poor dissemination about these procedures. A lot of the claims have actually been filed either by the revenue field officers or by the forest guards. The rejections in the name of the Gram Sabha have been made by the field officials. Then in any case, even if it goes through that process, the thing is that the claimant has to be informed about the reason for rejection and has the right to appeal. Now the thing is that if you ask the state governments, we've looked at a lot of the official data is extremely dodgy because the state governments themselves don't have this information. The Ministry of Tribal Affairs, in fact, had written to all the state governments that there is large-scale disproportionate rejection without following the due process, and that all these rejections should be reviewed. Now the thing is that a lot of the reviews have just not taken place. And so even if on paper, it's shown as it's done, one needs to check whether the reasons for rejection, the state governments could not actually produce the reasons for rejection when they were asked. Whether these reasons have been given to the claimants, whether they had a genuine opportunity,
so you're questioning, so you're saying was the due process,
there is a time.
So you're saying was the due process followed. Lalita Kumaramangalam, let me just now get you to respond to what Mohammad Khan was saying about the fact, he says the government is not serious about tribals. I'm sure you want to rebut that, but before that let me ask you, because let's just step back for a second, Lalita Kumaramangalam, and consider what this is essentially about. This is effectively asking for the eviction of 1 million tribal households. That's a huge number, and actually a very difficult and complex and problematic idea, which we shouldn't lose sight of. Lalita Kumaramangalam, are you prepared? I mean, is your government now, your state governments, BJP governments, wherever they are, where which now have these evictees on the list, are you going to now start evicting them?
Look, Vasu, that's not a question that I am empowered to answer. But I think that there's one issue that troubles me. As I said, I'm an animal lover. I have nothing against the claims of tribals, and I agree with you that to evict 1.1 million families is going to be not only a gargantuan but possibly an impossible task. But that is the physical part of it. With regard to forests, I'd like to say that today, given the pressure of modern living, or whatever you want to call it, most of us seem to forget that forests themselves are living entities. Anybody who is an animal lover, or not anybody, but those who have worked in this field, they will tell you that forests themselves have they're living entities. They have their own rights. I'm not saying that human beings don't, but it is a fact that increasingly forests have been encroached upon, not just in India, but all over the world. And there is a rising fear. NDTV itself has done that huge, massive, extremely successful and wonderful campaign to save our tigers. What are we saying? That we are encroaching upon our forests too much? And like I said in my first statement, it's not just the tribals who are doing it. A lot of other people too are, including many state governments. Now, this is not about the politics of anything. It's just that I think the petitioners, I don't know, like I said, I haven't gone through that petition, but I think the petitioners may have understated their case perhaps, or perhaps the Supreme Court has looked at all the various issues here, not merely the rights of the tribals, but all the other issues too.
Okay, do you think that the
now it's not going to be easy for any of the governments, regardless of whether they are Congress or BJP or some other party.
Do you think
it's
the
going to be very
center should challenge
difficult to even actually implement this decision.
No, but then do you think the center? Do you think that the center should challenge this verdict?
Look, if there is a demand from the groups, look, Vasu, if there is a demand from people who are working with forest peoples and the forest people themselves, of course the center will look at it. I don't think that we are going to say we are not going to look at the rights of the tribal peoples.
Okay, fine.
But the Supreme Court is after the Supreme Court, so I can't unnecessarily get into contempt of court by saying something.
Okay, Lalita, right, just quickly.
I have 2 quick points to make. With all the amount of respect that I can muster, I feel Ms. Kumaramangalam betrays a completely superficial understanding of the Forest Rights Act, and I'll tell you why. The Forest Rights Act and animal love go very well together. 2 examples, Devanhalli and Nagarhulle in Karnataka, we resettled OTFDs, other traditional forest dwellers, outside of the area to the margins of that sanctuary. The same has happened with Corbett and various other sanctuaries. They have never come in conflict in that regard. Here's the second thing, and this is very important for your viewers to hear. On August 8, 2009, the Ministry of Environment and Forests during the UPA time passed a circular giving priority to forest rights, to forest dwellers. That circular was withdrawn by this government, by the Ministry of Environment and Forests under Prakash Javadekar. There have been similar steps taken again and again by this government over the last 4 years.
We've got Devi Goenka on the OB. Devi Goenka, just simply on the scale of it, you think that this is realistic, or is this something even desirable to be evicting millions of people, a million plus households from forests?
Well, I think we have a choice about deciding whether we want any forests in the country or whether this country can survive without forests. And surviving without forests means surviving without water and surviving without clean air. And if the Forest Rights Act continues to be implemented in this way, if the politicians keep extending the cut-off dates and they allow fresh encroachment to happen, let me tell you that if the forest land is distributed in this way, even after distributing the entire forest land in the country, there will still be tribals and other scheduled, other forest dwellers without land at all.
Okay.
The second point I want to tell you is we are facing an agrarian crisis in this country.
Right.
Thousands of farmers are committing suicide because they can't make their living out of agricultural land.
Right.
And what are these marginal tribals going to do with 1 hectare of forest land in the middle of nowhere, where there is no infrastructure, there is no health, there is no education?
Okay.
I mean, what kind of life are you condemning them to?
Okay,
Is this
okay.
what you
We're
call
out of
progress?
time.
Is this what you call development? Is this what you call human rights?
Okay, we're out of time. I know everybody wants to jump in and counter this. Do I have time? I need to check if I have time. I don't have time, but I'm sorry about this. But we will come back to this story, I promise you, because it's a huge story and it is something we are going to return to. Thank you all so much for joining us. That's it on Reality Check. Thanks for watching. Good night.